was watching a Bruce Lipton video the other day, speaking on this subject of like trauma release and tremoring and stuff. He essentially said that, you know, we have, this actually is kind of relevant to the episode. We have this state when we're, you know, from birth to about 7 years old, we're in a different brain state that is essentially like a hypnotic suggestion state. And because if you think about it, right, you get a computer, that computer has, just like the human body, you know, comes out and it's like super advanced. We don't even know half of what it, or more. But without software, you know, just like a computer, you have like a brand new, I don't know, Alienware. You can't do anything on it if you don't have software, because the software is like the programs of like, not just what can you do, but how do you actually do it? And so basically those first 7 years, we sponge, we absorb. That's why children learn so quickly, is because they're not really in the conscious mind, they're in the subconscious mind, which is absorbing, hypnotic, suggestible, echoing, mimicking, copying behaviors. And then, you know, at about, let's say, 7 or whatever, we switch over and we start to become more of a crystallized ego, like an I, and we start to identify with the conscious mind, and we start doing that thing where we are abstracting. To be fair, I'm pretty sure I started doing this a lot fucking earlier, because I was thinking about death when I was like 4. As soon as I found out about it, I was like, what's the point? Why are we here? How did I get swindled into this? Like, what the fuck is going on? What is this
some of us,
philosophical quagmire that I landed in? Like,
some people are more of the pneumatics versus the Hylics, or the, right. What's the middle tier in Gnostic? Now I'm blanking, but yeah, the psychics.
Yeah.
Where the in the Gnostic conception, there are some souls called the mnemonics that just are here, you know, have a little more of that knowledge from a previous existence and the Gnostic picture. And so they come in able to get to those questions earlier than others.
Right. Or they haven't lowered their frequency or their vibration sufficiently to have put those questions down long enough that they're not still fresh in their mind. But who knows? Yeah, I was just listening to Alan Watts talk about that Gnostic classification. But anyway, so he was talking about how so
you're talking about the formative brain state and downloading and trauma.
Right, but what water slide did I take to get there before this? Do you recall? We were talking about, so Bruce Lipton was saying that, I remember. He was saying that when we are, basically, if we do things fully from our conscious mind, the conscious mind gets vilified, you know, a lot, but it's like, it's how you do shit. Like, you need your you didn't have your conscious mind, you could never be like, hey, I'm thirsty, I'm gonna pick up this water and take off the cap and like drink it.
Yeah. If you weren't able to differentiate between your person and another,
well, you have no free will at all, because you wouldn't act in the world. The conscious mind, or the ego, is like the thing that the center of gravity, if you will, gravity's a psyop, that that organizes your desires and you know, it sort of like puts them along a vector of like, okay, in time and space, of like, okay, now this specific thing is going to happen because the entity that I refer to as myself desires it. Anyway, I digress. Basically, what he was saying is that this process of that, and that is what mindfulness actually is. Mindfulness is allowing yourself to just be fully in your body and like actually just engage fully with your five senses, because 99% of the time we're off on some fucking mental hamster wheel. Like, oh my God, I don't have enough money. What does she, what does she think of me? Like, oh, like, maybe I should like, buy this before Friday night. I don't have the right clothes to wear on my date. And like, blah, blah, blah. I have to change the oil in my car. And it's like, how often are we like, what is the sensation of this surface on my hand? Like, I'm paying attention to the internal state of my body. Like, I just ate all these tortilla chips. Like, do I feel better? Do I feel worse? Like, and so essentially what he was saying is that this blew my mind, even though I'm sure I've heard this a million times because I consume content like this all the time. He said, the thing that short circuits, well, let me preface with one more thing. He said that at any given moment, we are either making, I won't say full, but making substantial to nearly full use of our conscious mind. And that is how we bring the reality that we want kind of into focus and actually manifest it, right? Like if you got up right now and you said, all right, I have to shovel all the snow off of my driveway. There's like specific things that you have to do. You have to go into your conscious mind, which is like, okay, like where's the shovel? But I have to get my gloves. I have to get my hat, whatever. Like you have to do a set of specific things. And that's what the conscious mind, I won't get into the left brain, right brain things. I don't like to get into that. The conscious mind is there to be able to, it's like, you ask it specific questions, that it's specific rather than, the subconscious mind. It's like, oh, I dreamt of a girl and she was holding a pomegranate. What does it mean? Well, it could mean this. It could mean that. It's like, no, where's the fucking shovel? I need to shovel snow. I need a straight answer. So the conscious mind makes shit happen. It's like, this specific thing is going to happen. I'm going to make it happen. Right? The subconscious mind is like disengaged. It's out in the background. And so when you are in an altered state where you are fearful, or you're in like a state where you're not really fully in control of yourself, you are running and playing out all of those subconscious programs that have been programmed into you from the time you were 0 to 7 years old, and any modifications of those programs that have taken place by way of extreme experiences, extreme interpersonal interactions, or trauma that you have had since then. Because I fully believe, and I'm fairly, I would say, somewhat accomplished hypnotist. So I really, this stuff, I'm in it. It's relevant to my work. Yeah, and so, but what he said was that the one thing that we don't necessarily keep in mind, to use an ironic turn of phrase, that short circuits our ability to live mindfully from our conscious mind is thinking itself. Okay?
Wait, say that again.
Thinking prevents us from because think about it, right? In order to observe your environment or even your body, you need to put your conscious mind in the world, in physical reality. Like, because that's what we send our focus to wherever or whatever we want to obtain information about, right? So it's like, do I have a stomach ache? Like, did I just eat something weird? You put your attention on your stomach, right? Or if you're like, where did I leave that job application? Right? You put your attention onto something in the real world, right? But when you are thinking in that way that it seems only humans can, in this, because that's the thing, even before computers, we already had a virtual world. And that world is called abstraction. Like for example, and this is very relevant to today's episode, you're fantasizing. If you have a sexual fantasy, right? If you're an animal, to the extent that animals have dreams, you could maybe dream about a particular scenario, right? Like a sexually charged scenario, but you're not going to, you can't, an animal cannot fantasize because there is a choosing and a directing of like visualizational creative energy inward that's like, ooh, you know what would be nice? Oh, what if like, you know, Cindy from accounting, whatever it is, you know, and then you go and you're creating your own world, right? You know what I'm talking about, fellas. Anyways.
Yeah.
So
and
I always wanted to say that in like a radio show.
Cindy
context.
the antelope can't be fantasized about by Bob the other
Right.
antelope because they don't possess that.
It just wouldn't happen. I feel like we all know,
neurological subroutine. Yeah.
And so that's what I thought was really interesting, because he was saying that like, yeah, that thinking is the act of taking the conscious mind and actually retreating from the real world and going into your inner world. So you're directing your conscious mind inwardly, and it can't be in two places at once, unlike the subconscious mind, which is kind of everywhere. It's even outside our body. And we like share it with all of the cosmos. And so you end up externally, your body, and even because of everything's connected to our body, the way we are in the world, you end up playing out these subconscious programs. And so I don't know, this just blew me away, because I was like, whoa, makes a lot of fucking sense. Because it's like you set these goals and you do all these things from your conscious mind, and you're like, yes, today, you know, this year I will lose 20 pounds and I will, you know, like write my next book of sonnets and blah, 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 you know, or like, I'll like, whatever, you know, I'll become president of the United States. But then if you spend your time thinking or worrying or ruminating, then you're not even like acting in the world as the same person, or I guess I should say from the same mind power that set those goals. So it's like, you know, like you're driving, you're like, okay, we're going to Buffalo. And then like, you know, your friend in the back who just like popped a Xanax takes the wheel and he's like, we're going into the ditch. And you're like, damn it, I told you we're going to Buffalo. And he's like, that was never my plan. That was your fucking plan. I didn't even hear you say that because I was blacked out. Like, that's kind of, I think that's a decent metaphor. Anyway, I'm going to connect this to what we were talking about, believe it or not. And then I'm going to do a short little intro thing, and then we'll move on to the episode. Because that's all right today. What I'm going to say is, with the trauma thing, we take our conscious mind and before the trauma is even over, we start thinking about it, right? We start thinking, and then, you know, you could go into like the MK Ultra and the fragmentation and the subpersonalities, and like, you know, I mean, you and I could have a field day about that, but just to try and get through this point, because we have this I identity, right? We already, again, before the internet, we already had a virtual world. We have like a room in our mind that's like outfitted. This actually will lead in very well to what I have planned for this episode. We have all of our accoutrement of identity. Like we have all of our, because when you ask yourself, this is who I am, it's like, there's literally like a little set. Like there's like a, you know, if you ask someone who they are, again, not to get caught up in like the non-duality or the Advaita, because then it's like, I'm no one, I'm a cosmos, whatever. But if you ask a normal average person, who are you? They'd say, oh, like I'm a car mechanic, I'm a teacher, I'm, I don't know, Black, I'm Puerto Rican, I'm white, I'm Jewish, I'm this, I'm that, you know, I'm whatever. And they identify. It's like, I identify, like I, and then all the shit that I add on to my, like all the I don't know, the tar and feathers and clay, all the things that I'm like covering myself over with, almost like putting on makeup. And then that makeup is like your eye, it's your facade of who you are. And so as soon as something happens to us that makes us question anything, which is like every second of every day, because we've become such a mental species, we start to think about it. We start to reflect on what it means about who we are and how it like affects who we are, and whether it's changing who we are. which to begin with, this idea of who I am, who we are, is a very, when you start to like actually dive into it, it's a very, very tenuous thing. You know, I'm sure you're familiar with, if you mentioned Gödel, Escher, Bach, and all that stuff. So, you know, when you look for the I, it just literally, it dissolves in the edges of everything around it, right? So there you go.
There's
Yeah, I love a well-read companion. So
and
yeah,
the other one is that I was going to bring up was George Louis Borges and Labyrinths, but particularly in this book, the Library of the Mind, I think it's called, which is all about, yeah, that internal world, and just a story about basically the narrator of the story is looking through the library of his own mind and just describing it to the reader. It's interesting.
That's awesome. Yeah, I got to reread some of that stuff. But yeah, so just briefly to cap that, I think that, you know, this ability that we have to visualize and you know, abstractify, if you will, is really, you know, it's best used responsibly when we recognize that it is as much a curse as it is a blessing, right? Because a human being can draw up a bunch of blueprints for a beautiful cathedral, right? Or a mosque or whatever. And it's like, that is like a really amazing use of abstraction, you know, that I would love to do and feel very proud of myself. Like architecture, I feel like is one of the highest, you know, like forms of like, I'm going to create an image in my mind and then make it real in the world. Like that's beautiful. But then the other side of the other edge of the sword is, because whatever you focus on, you are already in the process of creating it just by focusing on it, because that's where you're putting your attention. And literally, that's how this whole fucking world works, is where you put your attention is what is real to you. Like that's like the, you know, that's the most distilled down kind of simple, I don't know, truth, whatever. So if you have something happen to you and it's a trauma, and like this happened to me. Okay, so I'll use an example in my life. I got this tooth pulled, right? Recently. And I immediately like, and again, like, I mean, you know, all disclaimers apply. Like everyone knows the dentist is not a fun place to go. And like, you know, not cool to get surgery. Like that's traumatic. And, but then afterwards I was like, this is it. Like I've made a grave mistake. I should never have gotten this tooth pulled. And now, like that's it, you know, it's over. Like now I'm gonna get an infection and die, and like I made a mistake, and like, you know, just like I went deep into this rabbit hole of like this thing that just happened, and it's even worse because I made the decision to do it. Granted, I listened to doctors, which you should just never fucking do. So that's, let me just put that right out there, regardless of the value of this story. But aside from that, it was like I screwed myself over. I used my will to choose this outcome that like was the wrong choice. And so before I had even like 3 or 4 days into it, before I was even like a tenth of the way into the healing process, I was like, that's it. I've made a terrible mistake. This was a horrible trauma. And now I'm going to die. There's no way I can recover from this. And so as my body and mind are trying to heal, I am like putting all of my energy and attention and intention, unbeknownst to myself, because then how can you not when you're in that intensive a state emotionally, into this outcome of like, that's it. I'm going to, like, my entire mouth is going to fall apart and I'm going to die. To some extent, like that may be true, but the point is, the example that I wanted to make is that you can never get over trauma or anything. You can never heal. You can never rejuvenate unless you let go of that thing. And from what we learned from all this stuff with animals and the tremor response, you have to let go physically before you can let go psychologically, right? Or rather, you need both, but you have to let go physically. But the caveat is, if you are clutching that thing white-knuckled psychologically with your mind and your mental energy, you're not going to be able to let go of it physically. You just won't. because you're literally holding on to it. You can't let go of something that you are holding on to the entire time. So I don't know. I just wanted to make that point about how the thinking faculty prevents us from like moving on from shit and healing from things, because it's a very double-edged sword, this ability to reflect on the past. And so yeah, I don't know. That's why I think, for me at least, short of ecstatic dance, that's why exercise is so powerful, or movement in general, is because it literally is the only thing. It's your body telling your brain, like, okay, I can see you're like really busy, like, you know, reflecting on your fucking weird, like brokenhearted middle school drama or whatever, but like actually our muscles are moving right now, so we need that blood. So I'm just gonna like take it, and like, you know, you can re-engage with this, you know, scintillating mental activity like later, because like this is not priority right now. And it's interesting because that does seem to be, you know, the whole science of hormesis, that really does seem to be like one of the main hacks of like how to, not to use a buzzword, but how to heal the body, is like just by completely changing the situation and applying something that under you know, different circumstances would be viewed as a negative or like an aversive stimulus, but because it's something that forces the body to change gears, and the mind as a result as well, because it's like, you're not, you know what I mean? It's like substituting. It's like you think you're in this reality where you're pining over such and such, but actually you're trying to lift a cinder block. So like, you got to be here right now. And that it forces you to let go on a physical and, you know, and physiological level.
Well,
anyway,
I certainly agree with all that, and you know, a couple of things that I jotted down to make mention of is, you know, that Bruce Lipton is certainly not the only one that had talked about that formative brain states and the kind of ideas of the, you know, mental neural computers, quote unquote. Robert Anton Wilson, who doctor of psychology, in addition to being an interesting character and a pretty darn good writer, if you ask me. Interesting character, maybe double underline, but talked a lot about that, the developmental brain, and how those programs that get downloaded or uploaded, however direction it's going, in those formative years, you know, that entails the formative operating system of that analogical, not analogical, the kind of allegorical human mental biocomputer. You know, it's certainly not something that only Bruce Lipton is talking about. A lot of folks certainly have. And from there, I kind of jumped off onto the other way that, or one of the ways, you know, you certainly ecstatic dance, which can lead to this type of brain state. You know, you certainly see it in a lot of African traditions, tribal dance that is so ecstatic to the point of essentially bringing on altered states of consciousness. And, you know, even if you look at some of the syncopation rhythms that are not inherent, but are used, I should say, in a lot of African tribal ceremonial dance rituals, the syncopation is such that it is geared towards that shaking, that ecstatic shaking that you were talking about that animals do. And that is the way to kind of physically put the body in that state of forcing the mind to reset itself. And the other way, and, you know, certainly there's African medicines for that, is entheogens and psychedelics. And, you know, people like Robert Anton Wilson, again, Timothy Leary, folks like that were studying the, you know, kind of pioneering research with LSD and different substances like that. Richard Alpert / Ram Dass, you know, these were just ways to essentially force your brain into that reset stage to kind of, okay, we're gonna reset some of these programs that we've been running on, you know, uninstall them, free up that brain space, and then hopefully come out of that state with the ability to choose whether to reinstall those programs or not. and that's kind of that Etch-a-Sketch shake reset for the neocortical function that the humans have, because like I was saying earlier, the animals don't possess the neocortical capacity to really have their thought overcome their instinct, and the instinct is to move and shake and reset the brain, reset the trauma pattern, reset physically, neurologically, all reset the whole system. Because of the power of our neocortex and the abilities of our neocortex, it can overrule that, because like you're saying, you immediately start thinking about, and you immediately start trying to work on that with thought and with ego separation, and that can lead to psychological alters and the multiple or split personality or dissociation.
I would argue
psychedelics can kind of do that too, and if used correctly, that's one of the purposes of that medicine. So
there's a I don't remember the exact. I'll have to find it. Remind me to send this to you. I'll just write it on my hand. What I was going to say is, I would argue that, first of all, I fully agree that ultimately it's the neocortex, because that's where we experience bliss states, that has that top-down control, and that ultimately is the one to reset it. But yeah, I would argue that where we get stuck is actually more the midbrain and the limbic system, and like the amygdala area, or at the very least, it is like reciprocal connections and, neuronal kind of like pathways, specifically like dopaminergic pathways, and maybe like epinephrine, norepinephrine type stuff. That's from it's hijacked. You know what I mean? Like that's that midbrain area that's like, making us worry or ruminate or fixate, and it's kind of it's control from the bottom over that more neocortical anyway. But that's details. Yeah. But what I wanted to say is that nope, I guess that was it. There was something else. Oh yeah, I think psychedelics are that's why there's so much talk about them, and that's why they're so powerful. But I think intention is really critical, because the neocortex can also, it can steal our energy just the same by making us think about things that don't actually matter to our lives.
Yeah, and that's why so many of the again, like tribal, I'll go back to African tribal tradition, and the main entheogen used a lot of those traditions that use entheogens as opposed to inducing that same brain activity, neurological activity through ecstatic dance and dance related rituals that literally put your body, I mean, from what I understand, I've never experienced, what I understand, that level of, was it hypoxiatic, movement to the point where you're just getting barely enough oxygen for your brain to do what it needs to do, can actually send you into states that are more or less similar to hallucinogenic states. But even if they're using a natural compound to do it, in Africa, usually ibogaine, or, in the North American traditions, native traditions, peyote, South American, whether it's ayahuasca or psilocybin in Central America, wherever. The point is, these were never used as just a way to go inside and escape. It was used in ceremonial and ritualized, prescribed patterns to put everyone in that state, who's in that ceremony, in that state of intention. Whereas saying this is not just some frivolous thing, this is an intentional ceremonial use of this sacred plant in order to advance your journey, advance your consciousness, advance your awareness, and not just of the external world, but of course of the internal world. So the ritual aspect of it is very important.
Yeah, and I think we don't necessarily have a very good cultural vocabulary for that type of stuff, because we have words like ritual and intention, but because our way of life and our language sort of historically over the last few hundred years has not been very holistic, it's been very compartmentalized and like very like kind of mentally almost like pinpricky, I want to say.
And
like
ad hoc, it's kind of built as it's needed. Like, oh, we don't have a word for that. Let's kind of create one rather than go, okay, what is the concept? What are some similar words? Now, what's the best way to describe that? It's just like, oh, we'll just say that it's, a life hack. That's what it is now. Instead of saying, this is a way to make your life really better, to do something easier, to really describe it. We'll just call everything now as in that realm.
And now that we are neck deep in the sludge of postmodernism, we have so many words that we've created that have absolutely no meaning. And that's, I think, the principal difference that jumps out at me between our culture, aside from the lack of, but this actually all feeds really well into the topic for today.
Which I promise you, gentle listener, we will get to.
We have this cultural vacuum, and and it goes because, again, it's like we've severed ourselves from these much more holistic like ways of like things like natural philosophy and astrology, that really it's like this beautiful rainbow that overarches everything and like encompasses everything, and it's sort of it's insubstantial in that like you can't poke it with a stick, but it's literally in everything and it informs everything, and it is this just beautiful organizing principle that informs everything and brings everything sort of under its purview. And so I think living in a culture like that really honored that stuff, whether they necessarily used modern tropical astrology, whatever or not, they had this view that, okay, we're here and I'm here. I have my mother, my father, my family, and my tribe, but like we're all in the body of God, and we have these stories and these myths to look to remind us, not to think that or to see that, but to remind us that this is a meaningful world and everything matters. And instead, we kind of are in this world where it's guilty until proven innocent, where it's like, what do you mean? Like nothing matters. You know what I mean? Show it to me. Like, show me a table of data that like it matters, to the point where we're getting to a very fascistic Nazi place with it, where it's like feelings, suffering, like what is that? Like put suffering in a beaker and show it to me, and then let's do a placebo-controlled double-blind trial where if I drink the suffering, I have to feel different, and then I'll write an essay about it. Otherwise, suffering is not a real fucking thing, and we can just have people inject lethal shit into everybody. But what I was going to say is that I think it's because we don't have, it's kind of like in physiology, I was just reading about this the other day. I was doing the turpentine thing. I don't know if you know about this.
Oh yeah.
It's really fucking powerful. Yeah, I think that's one of the reasons I'm kind of firing on all cylinders today too, because I just did it yesterday. And yeah, it was saying to drink like a bunch of water with pink Himalayan sea salt dissolved in it. And the logic is when you do the turpentine thing, because it literally it's just going to release everything, and like it's going to kill or whatever. And a lot of those parasites and candida and everything, they are like encapsulating, because again, like I realized like those things aren't actually separate from us. They're literally parts of us. Like everything that's in like your little 6 to 5 foot bubble is you. Even like the bottle on your desk, like that's you because you put that there. It's in your environment. And it's just because it's not in your body, like you can reach out and drink it and then it is in your fucking body. So it's like, it's interesting to think about that kind of stuff. Like these fungi, all of this stuff, unless it's been injected into us by a malevolent government, that's a little bit different. Then I think that's an exception.
But at the same time, if you showed up to the thing and you waited in the line, you rolled up your sleeve, you chose to make that a part of your.
I didn't necessarily want to say that, but I guess it needs to be said.
It needs to be said, yeah. I mean, that's one of the things I've been going around with a couple of people on recently, is that the whole idea that it's true that there are violations of consent that happen. But that's not to say that everyone who has, I showed up and got the vaccine because I was told to do so, that they were coerced into. unless you were, you know, to the point where there was, you know, to use the old cliche, if nobody put a gun to your head, even if you felt like you didn't have another choice, that's just because you didn't stop to think, do I have another choice? And so to a degree, and this is how, you know, these folks that want to be psycho, this is how they operate. Well, let's make them choose it. But how can we get it into their heads that they are not really having a choice, and this is the thing they have to be doing? When ultimately, you know, we know you're still the one showing up. You're still the one saying, okay, yeah, I guess so. Go for it. If it's this or, you know, me being inconvenient. So yeah, it goes back to Eddie and De La Boetti writing in the 1550s saying, where do these tyrants get the ability to kick you and to knock you down if you're not giving them the hands and feet to do it with, you know? So
last thing I wanted to say is what I've noticed is I think in using the substance I'm about to mention as a medicine, the one thing that I've noticed, and so again, like, I think, you know, anything can be medicine if the situation calls for it. Even like poisonous mushrooms, you know, if you're like a slave to some psychotic slave master and you want to like poison his food and get the fuck out of there, then like that's a medicine. You know what I mean? Nature provides. But what I was going to say is that, you know, people really, you know, they really vilify all of these chemicals that modern day chemists have created. But some of them are pretty fucking amazing, and they can do things that natural compounds cannot. And it's like, I mean, yeah, you know, it makes sense if we are a part of nature, you know, and we have these unique, incredible, God-given intellectual faculties, you know, to be able to abstract and imagine and visualize and then synthesize in the real world these chemicals that don't exist in nature. We are actually enriching, especially if it really is something with genuine medicinal value, we are enriching the world, and we are enriching and empowering others to heal themselves by creating healing pathways that didn't exist anymore. So it's really very similar. So what I was going to say is that the substance that comes to mind for the shaking tremors thing is MDMA.
Yeah. Because
MDMA, it actually makes you shake and tremble. Like if you do it, you get like that, like even your pupils will shake. And like, you know, you could say serotonin, this and that, and obviously, you know, that's part of it. I can't separate the two, but it's just interesting because like I've noticed if you really, really need to let go of something and process trauma and you do that stuff, it's like you feel it leave you. Like you feel it, and that's what you were saying is it's like that bliss state reset. And of course, a lot of it has to do with the huge release of oxytocin, and that feeling of, and all of this would happen in one of these rituals, I think, as well, like the dance or whatever, is the feeling of belonging and acceptance and being loved and whatever, maybe some more than others. But you know, I think it's that feeling of like letting go and release, just releasing, like, you know, whatever, whether you want to call it a demon or trauma or whatever, releasing that thing that you've been holding on to, that has been holding on to you and suffocating you under its weight, just of that heavy psychic energy that you didn't have a way of letting go of. Then when the smoke clears and the clouds kind of part after that experience, you're like, whoa, you feel like you have your free will back, because you're not just mired in that subconscious program associated with like staying with your claws dug into that trauma. So I just wanted to make that point. And
yeah, well, it's not I can't remember the name of
I'm
that.
overdue for one of those, incidentally.
Yeah, I'm thinking about it, me too. I can't remember the name of the researcher who did all that work in the 90s from New Mexico or New Mexico State University, but the subtitle of his book was The Spirit Molecule. And that's the whole, you know, it's
Rick Strassman.
Thank you. Yeah. And it's that's the spiritual release, or at least, you know, disentangling, if only for a minute, to whatever, you know, maybe limited degree is possible, but kind of trying to de-entangle some of the physical concerns of the physical, and de-entangling those from the core spiritual subconscious part of you and the mind that connects with the all, always, all the time, but gets, because of our need to use ego to make sure that we don't walk off a cliff, because we don't realize ourselves any different from the cliff and from the ground below. It does serve its purpose, but it's also helpful to re-identify and kind of take a step back from that and say, okay, what of the things of the physical world have I adopted that I shouldn't have? Have I been thinking about in the wrong way? What can I go back to saying, or that baseline, and going back to spirit, so to speak, going back to the subconscious, going back to that connection, one with the all. And yeah, that certainly is a useful tool. And I think the fact that it's such a short, when you said that, it kind of was just like, oh yeah, absolutely. The zebra you were talking about shakes off the trauma very quickly, and it only lasts a moment or a minute or a short time. And it's not like, when you do a native peyote ceremony, you're in for 12 hours or 10 hours inside of a smoke-filled teepee with a bunch of other people, because that's how long that reset ritual takes. With DMT, it's fairly brief. I mean, one of the most brief, experiences, up and down, certainly for psychedelics, which tend to be fairly protracted events and experiences. So yeah, that's a really interesting point. And again, it's not exactly like DMT is. I mean, it's created in a lab, but it's like LSD. It's natural. It's derived from something that the body, or it's based on something that the body produces naturally. So it's not. Yeah, the fact that it's predominantly created in a lab and has been synthesized, I should say, in a lab, it's not like they're taking something totally foreign to the human experience. It's something that can be produced by the human body, and is produced by the human body. And yeah, Strassman certainly, I don't know how much she got into it, but certainly kind of made allusions, at least to the idea that it is that, am I thinking about it right? That it can be produced in different dream states, but isn't metabolized the same way, and so it doesn't quite have the same.
I read that book such a long time ago.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, well, I know. I mean, just without brushing up on my neurochemistry, I know that the reason, when you take ayahuasca, man, we're never going to get to this topic today. When you take ayahuasca, the reason that they have the two plants they mix together is because DMT is a monoamine, and
right.
So the enzymes you're talking about, if you administer it orally, and you don't administer it along with a monoamine oxidase inhibitor, then it'll just get broken down by the monoamine oxidase enzyme. But then they have that vine or whatever, Buenos copy something, that they mix it with, and that contains an MAOI. And incidentally, if you ask them, how do you know this? They'll say, well, the plants told us to get this other plant. The plant spirit told us which plant. And and then that inhibits the enzyme, and so that allows it to be orally active. Otherwise, you have to vaporize it or whatever, which I do not recommend.
I don't think ayahuasca is something I'll ever.
Feel
the need to experience.
Ayahuasca sounds cool, but no, I was referring to what people refer to as smoking DMT, which is really more vaporizing DMT.
Oh, sure.
That is a trip on a light speed rocket ship to the top of the cathedral for 11 minutes, and then you're just back, and as though nothing happened. And it's a very, very, very challenging experience for people to integrate, and I've seen it drive people insane, just not to put it bluntly, because that's there's just, yeah, integrating experiences is like actually really important, as it turns out. You want to like,
and that's
continue
why,
to live in the
that's
world.
part of the reason why so many of those rituals are, I'm not sure about ayahuasca, but as far as I understand, it's at least 12, if not a 24-hour, commitment to that ritual. I know with the native church and peyote ceremony, I mean, you are literally up all night.
Oh yeah.
And you don't go to sleep the next day until, you're up for 36 hours if you wake up at your normal time and go do that in the evening, and then you go to bed the following night. And it does take all that time to reintegrate, to start to recoalesce, and that trip to the top of Cathedral is a good analogy. And I've always thought about it as, it's basically like living Gregor Cantor's whole life in 15 minutes.
It is really, it's time,
and going through the Aleph, trying to understand the infinities of infinities of infinities and the subsets of infinity, and how there's always a greater set of infinities than the set of infinities that you can encounter. And, he was doing that just with a, pen and paper or chalkboard, and, in the 1800s, trying to calculate that, and slowly driving himself insane, trying to calculate the sets of infinities, and the infinite sets of infinities being a subset of a larger set of infinities. And it's like going through all of that in a very, very direct way in 15 minutes, instead of something that he slowly went crazy trying to figure out for 30, 40 years.
Well, I think the reason it's so difficult to integrate, that, first of all, that sounds awesome. And I feel like the 1800s were a blast, with the exception of like consumption and tuberculosis and all that stuff. But yeah, I think it's the fact that the entire experience is completely devoid of any words or any linguistic anything. There's just you see symbols, but there are no words in the entire experience. If any of these beings or entities that you encounter communicates with you, the communication is like beamed. It's just like they send out a feeling or a thought or a vibe, and you just get it. You're like, oh, like, for example, one of my experience, it's like, oh, they're very disappointed with me because I came here with the wrong intention, things like that. But nothing is ever spoken. It's just like, and actually I was in a cathedral in one of these experiences with the Easter Island heads, but they had bodies, and they were all made of like a different gemstone. It was the inside cathedral ceiling of my own skull that had expanded to an infinite height, and they were like towering over my little puny ego consciousness, and they were kind of just like standing over me, like disapprovingly, like as if to say, like, oh, you're back already. Like, we just, you came to us so recently, and we gave you everything, and now you're back again. Like, what have you done with the gifts that you received last time, kind of vibe. And I was like, what? And they were like, I see. Like, as we say in Russian, "Всё с тобой понятно," which means like, I see how it is with you. And I was like, fuck. And then they were like, yeah, now enjoy a decade of horror. And I was like, what? They didn't say that, but now looking back, I can see where it went.
They communicated it through some frequency.
Well, no, and I don't think, I don't want to get into the fate stuff, but yeah, I think that it's just when you cannot integrate something, it's always going to create difficulty in your life, because you're like off kilter, this experience lives inside you, but you don't have a way of importing it into your present and future. You're like, it's this like incompletely compartmentalized, aspect of yourself.
And that's this theme's going to come up again, because so obviously it must be important now. But I keep going back to the analogy that trauma is the psychological equivalent of debt.
Whoa.
And when you have trauma, you go into psychological debt, and you're trying to then use your future, leverage, mortgage your future to pay off something that happened in the past. And that's the exact concept of debt. And I would say, thinking that the precursor to all these control systems was a high level of psychological understanding, I think that at some point it was realized that really what we're going for is to try and keep people in trauma. So how do we create that traumatic experience in the physical world? And one way to do that is to put people in some sort of debt and some sort of financial, even before finance and economics were really fully fleshed out. But how do we use some sort of property? How do we use the property that they have to put them into debt the way that the way that you can control somebody who's gone into a traumatic debt psychological state, and say, well, we could create this proxy currency thing that then we're always charging them, that's made up. And a lot of trauma goes back to, your mind is making oftentimes a lot more out of it. Your tooth is a good example, thinking, oh my gosh, I made a bad decision, I'm going to pay for that. Oh, I'm going to pay for that decision. I'm going to pay for that decision. That's debt right there. That is exactly the mentality of, oh, I bought that thing on the credit card. I'm going to pay for that. I'm going to have to pay it with interest.
Oh, I didn't really need that. I've done it now.
Mm-hmm. And you can't go, you know what? That's totally in my mind, most of this. And I need to stop and forgive or expunge in the debt sense, forgive the debt, forgive the trauma. It's the same term. You forgive debt, you forgive trauma. They're two manifestations of that very same concept. And I, just was talking about that again and looking back at some work I did about a year ago, actually, right around this time last year on that kind of topic of the trauma debt cycle. And it's popping back up now in the last couple of days. So apparently this time of the year is important for us to keep that in mind. Maybe it has to do, go back to the astrotheology and astronomy, or excuse me, astrology aspects that, we're in that time. This is kind of the center point of the winter season right now. We just came from Candlemas, was what, 8 days ago. The center point, the midpoint of winter. And it's when you're looking at those deep underlying death kind of things, because we are in the northern hemisphere, right, or northern plane of the circle, however it works on whatever your model of the realm is.
We're closer to the middle if you follow that one. Yeah.
What is conventionally known as northern. Anyway, we're in that death zone of the sun, so to speak, where and especially as far north as I am, this time of year it's dark at 5 p.m. Dark. Well, maybe not so much now, but a month ago it certainly was. But anyway, so these topics coming about, and then coming into this new, all right, we know we're shifting towards the spring and towards the rejuvenation. How do we want to use this time around on that cycle to break from old patterns, to break from old programs, to break from old psychological pattern behaviors, to reset our neurological biocomputer to run programs that we want it to run? This is maybe why this topic keeps coming up at this time of year for me, is that, something in my subconscious is saying, hey, you've got an opportunity to reset for the new year that's coming in a couple of weeks here with the dawn of the spring and the rejuvenation and the light of life coming back to your part of the realm, to piss no one off, hopefully, except maybe people who hate J.R. Tolkien will be like, it's not a realm, this isn't Middle Earth, you fucker. Maybe it is, I don't know. But and then really quick, I'll try and put a link to it or something, but there's a great song from my favorite band of all time, Crosby, Stills and Nash. It's a song called Cathedral, and it was written after Graham Nash took LSD and was walking around Winchester Cathedral in London and had this really interesting experience. So the lyrics are really cool. I'll put a link to that and people can listen to it. Just sprang in my mind. It's not that related, but what's that?
I want to take acid and go to a cathedral. That sounds like a great fucking
especially cathedral. Winchester, which is great old cathedral. And where is it? Well, Winchester probably, but in England. But yeah, the song's interesting. It's cool.
Well said.
Yeah, and then that's the story too. And Labyrinth is a collection of gorgeous short stories, but the story in here that I was thinking of is the Library of Babylon, which is kind of like, you know, a study of a cathedral. You know, it's a literary version of. I mean, it's it's a short story. It's maybe like 10 pages long, and it's like this inner poetic inner narrative drug trip written down. It's a really cool story. So it's all over. We continue to try to, as mankind, as members of mankind, try and plumb the depths of what it is that our mind is able to do. And you know, I feel like if our God-given mind has these abilities, there's probably at least something that we could learn from exploring them and trying to understand them. So
there is an episode of the Higher Side Chats with a Dr. Tom Zinser, and he does some really interesting research. He's got some really cool work on trauma and entity possession. And it's really fucking interesting, and like alters, and I mean, it's like that episode. I actually should I'll probably listen to it over again. Maybe not tonight, but yeah, he really, I mean, it's got it all. It's got occultism, like it's like you got to check it out. You know, both you, Andy,
right now,
and dear listener. I think maybe we should just save the topic for next time. Like, you know, I feel like we.
Okay.
You know what I mean? I mean, we so much has just come.
Yeah, that's cool. I feel like we've, you know, hit on some really interesting concepts, and you know, I don't know if there's a tie-in back to art, which is fine, but there's certainly, I don't know, we've mentioned some books and stuff. I guess that don't count, but I'm certainly interested, and I'm trying to judge whether or not I should ask what the topic is, or whether I should wait and just find out, because I was kind of looking forward to just coming to it organically since you've been thinking about it. But if we're going to talk about it at some point in, you know, the next few days or the next week or whatever, maybe I should so I can bring some thoughts as well.
Yeah. Well, but I don't want to spoil it for the viewer. I obviously can tell you after.
Well, I can edit it out.
Oh, okay. All right. Well.